This is Load Management Dialogue presented by PLMA. Here you'll discover practitioner perspectives regarding flexible energy load management, including demand response and distributed energy resources. If you are listening to this via the GoToWebinar application, you may type your questions and comments during the broadcast. And now let me turn the conversation over to Brett Feldman with Guidehouse. He's a PLMA Awards Group Co-Chair.
All right, thanks, Rich, and thanks to everyone out there for joining us for another edition of PLMA's Load Management Dialogue. I guess I'm the designated PLMA FERC guy. About 5 years ago, I did the PLMA webinar on Order 745 when that made it up to the Supreme Court, and here I am again 5 years later. So, of course, we're here because on September 17th, FERC put out Order 2222. There's a lot of different ways people have said that. If you say it as it is, it sounds like you're doing spitballs or something. I've heard 2222, I've heard 2x4, and I personally, as a old school college football fan from Boston, I like the double Flutie in honor of Doug Flutie, who wore number 22 back at Boston College. But I'd love to hear any other interesting names people have heard for this order, either from the participants or the audience. And of course, this is on participation of distributed energy resource aggregations in wholesale markets. We have a diverse perspective for our panel here today, from an investor-owned utility, the cooperative viewpoint, from the states, and also from a DER aggregator. And we did ask a couple RTO representatives if they could join us, but at this time they aren't able to. So the way this is going to work is that I'll give a brief intro to the topic, then each speaker will introduce themselves and how their position relates to the order, and make some opening remarks, and then we'll open it up for Q&A, and please submit questions at any time. We've already gotten a few beforehand, so we definitely expect a lively discussion here. So just to level set everyone, there's probably different levels of what people know about the order. I'll give a little overview. I'll admit I haven't read all 290 pages of it, so I'll just read from the order summary, which really has 11 main points for the order. And basically, for each RTO, they must allow distributed energy resource aggregations to participate directly in RTO markets and establish DER aggregators as a type of market participant. They must allow aggregators to register aggregations under one or more participation models. They have to establish a minimum size requirement for aggregations that do not exceed 100 kilowatts. They have to address locational requirements, distribution factors and bidding parameters for aggregations, information and data requirements, metering and telemetry requirements, coordination between the RTO, the aggregator, and the distribution utility, as well as any relevant retail regulatory authority, and also address modifications to the list of resources in aggregation, and address market participation agreements for aggregators, and finally, the utility opt-in, opt-out based on the size of the utility. So those are the main points that the order is getting at. And it goes into effect in 90 days, and the RTOs have 270 days to submit plans. So we won't really see anything for another 9 to 12 months. But there have already been several requests for clarification and rehearing. So it's going to be active, and we'll see if anyone wants to take it to the court, like what happened with Order 745. I'd be happy to go back down to the Supreme Court again if that's the case. And just to open up some of the comments and get things flowing, I'll say I'm skeptical of FERC's impact on the markets with these types of orders. I'll go back to FERC Order 745. Now, I feel like if it was the counterfactual happened, if either FERC or the court said that demand response at that time was not allowed to participate in the markets, that would have been a huge deal. But the way it went, it was mainly status quo with some incremental improvements. So for DER, this process at FERC really started back in 2016, so it's taken 4 or 5 years to get to this point. And in that time, most of the RTOs have already had their own DER proceedings, so they've been getting up there. So I think, again, it'll be interesting to discuss if this is incremental or more transformational. And I'll also point out there was FERC Order 841 on energy storage recently that I think might be more impactful because it's focused on that specific resource type instead of this, which was a little more broad. So with that, I'll open it up to our speakers to give their perspectives, and we'll start with Anja Gilbert from PG&E.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Anja Gilbert. I'm a principal at Pacific Gas and Electric in our Integrated Grid Planning and Innovation Group. At PG&E, I focus on how DRs can help make the duck curve fly, or in other words, how DRs can help flatten the load curve. That means my focus is on DERs on the supply side in wholesale markets, so things like demand response integration and FERC Order 2222, as well as other DER pathways like rates and standards. And I'll flag that while I work at PG&E, the perspectives I'm sharing today are my own. So when FERC Order 2222 came out, my reaction was good. Now we can have more minds working on this. In California, our ISO, the California Independent System Operator, is always innovating and has had a market model in place since 2016 that largely mirrors what FERC Order 2222 requires for all ISOs and RTOs. So how have things been going? We haven't seen participation in CAISO's DER aggregation model quite yet. And I think that's largely because the ball is in state regulator court as far as developing corresponding retail rules. You'll notice in reading all about 300 pages of FERC Order 2222 that FERC deferred some aspects to local regulatory authorities, and for good reason. There's going to be new systems required, and when you have retail customers acting as supply, it does require coordination between ISOs and state regulators. Just because there's a wholesale product, rules need to be established by the state related to interconnection, billing, metering, customer protection, and in California's case, capacity valuation and counting. Additionally, this is going to require huge upgrades and investments into our systems. This is going to require investment in IT systems, communication platforms, and may mean that new systems are needed for visibility and control, like increased SCADA and a distributed energy resource management system. You'll see this play out in utility rate cases. And I think it's at this point that it's worth taking a quick look at history in terms of integrating retail load into markets. As Brett flagged earlier, FERC, after they had their demand response order, it has taken ISOs as well as states a while to integrate demand response. In California's case, it took about 10 years of regulatory work, collaboration with stakeholders, and building out those systems to fully develop the demand response model, and we're still continuing to refine it today. So while there's a lot that can be leveraged from that process of integrating retail load, this order, FERC Order 2222, is much more complex in that now load can also export. From my own perspective, there's 3 issues to consider in terms of FERC Order 2222 and how it fits into the broader context of enabling distributed energy resources. First, complexity is costly. DERs are envisioned to participate in a way that the grid wasn't designed for. We're moving from one-way power flow to a world where DERs are both sources and sinks of power. This is going to require investment into the distribution grid for upgrades, as well as enablement systems, like I mentioned earlier, for SCADA and DERMS for that visibility and control. We've had pilots in California that have looked at this more closely, but more needs to be done. The grid doesn't always operate as it was studied. The grid's dynamic, and sometimes there are issues out of our control. For example, when a car hits a pole, the grid and the circuits are often reconfigured, sometimes for days, and in other times for months, meaning export that was once safe as studied may not be under these new abnormal conditions. Second, DERs go where money flows. Currently in California, market integrated demand response has been more attractive because there's a capacity payment. It doesn't require 24/7 participation, and it has rules that allow NEM resources to also be a part of that load. So if there are more attractive alternatives, such as real-time rates or other programs that pay more in the future, it may mean that this model isn't as used. And I think from a policy and ratepayer perspective, state regulators will need to examine what DER pathways provide the greatest benefit and cost, while still enabling these resources in market. My third and last point is capacity is king. As the largest source of payment for DERs, if FERC Order 2222 and CAISO's DERA model, which mirrors FERC Order 2222, are to be attractive, we'll need to figure out the capacity piece. This means from a planning perspective, we'll need to understand when these DERs plan on acting as a wholesale resource versus a retail resource. From an operational perspective, we'll need to establish requirements for reliability. We'll also need to determine, based on those two factors, what will be compensated. And on this point, the California Public Utility Commission, our state regulator, is hosting a workshop on this very same topic at the end of November. So these are just a handful of the policy issues I see coming to play that require further discussion to enable FERC Order 2222 to marry customer abilities with grid needs. Thanks. Back to Brett.
Great, thanks, Anja. California is certainly a world of its own that could use its own session. But we'll move over to Marcus Hawkins, who's with the organization of MISO states. So Marcus, give us your perspective, please.
Thank you, Brett. My name is Marcus Hawkins. I'm the executive director of the organization of MISO states. And for those unfamiliar with OMS, as we call it, it is the regional state committee of all of the commissions within the MISO footprint. So a lot of the state regulatory proceedings that Anja was just talking about, there are 15 of them ongoing on a whole host of subjects related to this at the different state commissions in the MISO footprint. And we also include the province of Manitoba and the city of New Orleans within the membership of OMS. And I just want to be clear at the outset, I'm not speaking on behalf of the OMS board. I might reference some of the positions the board has taken, but I'm primarily just providing my own perspective here today. And a bit of background on OMS's involvement in this DER aggregation subject. We've been involved from the very beginning back in 2016 and have been coordinating with MISO to bridge that gap between the state jurisdictional and the FERC or wholesale jurisdictional components of DER aggregation. So the state regulators in MISO have been really forward-looking about trying to make sure that we end up at a place that's the most efficient and reliable way to integrate DER at both the retail and wholesale levels. And to do that, we've issued a set of joint priorities that kind of spell out some front-end work for how the commissions will work with MISO and coordinate a lot of the pieces that have now made it into the final order. We've been working on proactively to better understand those touch points between the retail rates and the wholesale rates and where that value for DER aggregation may be coming from. So these are things that we've been working on for a number of years and has definitely learned that as you dig in, peeling the layers of this onion, there's just endless layers, it seems like, and it gets really complex. So it's something that we've definitely appreciated as this process at FERC has played out over the last number of years. Overall, I think that state regulators are happy with where the order ended up as far as the level of control and flexibility afforded to the RTOs to comply with the order. We think in a lot of ways, like Anja was saying, a lot of the value for DER is still primarily at the local level and will be determined by the retail rates and the structure set at the commissions. And so, in MISO, where there is no centralized capacity market that produces a meaningful capacity price, the rates set at the state commissions will really determine how a lot of DER ends up integrating into the system. I'll say as an organization, we're really focused on the info and data requirements for how information from the retail side or the distribution side is fed into the MISO market, and where that balance is between too much information being required or too little. in order to maintain bulk system reliability. So that's something we're really focused on. We know that if there's too much information required, maybe the state metering or interconnection won't allow it to be even technically possible. And if it's too burdensome, all the DER will just remain participating at the retail level anyhow. So we want to strike that balance, and we've been trying to figure out, where that right place is. So going forward, we're looking to shape the stakeholder process in MISO to ensure that states and the right perspectives are at the table to help with this coordination. It's going to be really complicated. So we're looking to make a unique sort of stakeholder process where some of these, more demand side perspectives are able to come into the conversation. They're not the typical MISO followers or RTO followers. And so that's another area where we're interested in working forward on this compliance. So I'll leave it at that for now, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. If the prep calls any indication, there's a lot of exciting pieces to this. So back to you, Brett.
Yeah, thanks, Marcus. I did have to tell the panel to save some of their words in the prep for this session today. They were raring to go. So yeah, absolutely, and none less than our next speaker, Jay Morrison, who's from NRECA. So take it away, Jay.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Appreciate the opportunity to join you today for this conversation. I'm the Vice President of Regulatory Issues for NRECA. So I've been following the FERC issues. I've also been following the DER issues for more than 20 years for NRECA. This has been an important resource for cooperatives for twice that long. For over 40 years, co-ops and other utilities have been using distributed energy resources as an important tool for serving their customers at stable and affordable prices. It's a risk management tool, it's a market management tool, it's an operational tool that's incredibly valuable to the utilities that are able to access it. One Midwest co-op, the last time I saw their data, they could control 50% of their load between off-peak heating, water heaters, irrigation pumps, customer-owned generation that they could operate. This was a truly significant portion of their portfolio. Now, as we see more and more digitization in the system and in the tools that are available to us, as high-speed communications are being available in more places out to more customers, the potential value here just grows. So we're excited about distributed energy resources. We're not necessarily as excited about 841 and 2222. What I'm seeing, and let me take this up to a much higher level, sort of the theoretical level. I'm a policy nerd and I like to get up to that. So where is this taking us conversation? This is part of two related trends that I'm seeing at FERC. One is an ongoing shift of all aspects of state and utility resource decisions being moved from local planning and local policy to the centralized RTO markets. I see 841 and 2222 as very similar to what we're seeing in the Eastern RTOs with respect to buyer side mitigation in the capacity markets. So I think that the arguments over where decisions are being made, whether it's at FERC and the RTO stakeholder processes, or whether it's with state regulators and utility boards of directors, it's very similar between these two areas. The second thing that I'm seeing is an effort by some stakeholders to try to use federal policy and wholesale market design not to enable state and local decision makers to implement their own policy and resource decisions, but instead to force shifts in the way energy services are being made available to retail consumers. So it's not just about providing access for DER to the wholesale markets, but about providing access for wholesale players to the retail customers, even where those retail customers are being served by traditional utilities in states that don't have retail competition. Now, I do want to thank FERC in Order 2222 for not using this as an opportunity to make a wholesale leap down this path, pun intended. They did include an opt-in for small electric utilities, which is something we had pushed really hard for, and we think is incredibly important for our members. And I think we'll probably talk about that some more during the course of the conversation. They also showed some deference to the states on interconnection and safety issues. They said they were going to show deference on some of the economic issues. My concern is I'm not sure how sustainable that is. There are already rehearing requests on Order 2222 challenging FERC's decision to provide that deference to states, challenging FERC's decision to provide the opt-in. There's also a collateral attack in MISO by one aggregator challenging the deference that FERC provided in both 2222 and in 719, and asking for the opt-in, opt-out from 719 to be thrown out. I think we're going to be spending a lot of time litigating this question about where decisions about serving retail customers should be made, about where decisions about risk management should be made. And honestly, I don't think it's so much about DER, because we all agree about the value of DER. And we're all looking for how, as the technology improves, we can better take advantage of it for the benefit of customers. The question really is, where are those economic decisions going to be made, and where are those policy decisions going to be made? So I look forward to having that conversation as we continue this session. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. A lot of good points teed up there that we'll dive into. But first, we want to get to our final panelist here, Matthew Sachs from CPower.
Hey, thanks, Brett. Thanks all. Really happy to be here. Looking forward to the conversation. As a quick intro, I'm coming from CPower. Here I lead our strategy and business development. And before CPower, I have a long history of investing and building businesses around the grid edge. So maybe when you hear my comments, I'm really bringing a strategic lens and maybe less of a regulatory and legal lens here. Now, I thought everyone's comments were great, and I think there's a great debate of how to best get DRs out there. But all in all, I kind of have 2 points here. One is we're fairly optimistic and excited here, and the second is there's a lot of questions around the details. And I say we're optimistic and excited. Well, I think there's certainly many ways to kind of skin this fruit. This will act as a catalyst to get more DERs involved and to have the right conversations that across all regions, or most regions, where some have been ahead of others. So we're optimistic, and to put that quite simply, we're really optimistic for 2 reasons. We believe there's an inherent benefit for our customers here and for the grid. On the customer side, our customers, many customers across the country, have been installing DERs anyway. These are assets that are out there for their own reasons. So this will help them realize the full value, and will also promote the adoption of more of these assets and build what we believe is greater resiliency and move the grid towards the future. This certainly applies to all behind the meter assets. It's worth noting that there's another part here, which are grid tied assets that are located within the distribution grid. That's why we're excited from our customer standpoint. It's a chance to let them find more value for what they're already doing. On the grid benefit side, at the highest level, I think it creates a path for better utilization of gen and transmission infrastructure. And this is stuff that in some regions has been operating for really just hours in a year at the highest peak. There's always assets that are very well utilized. It also facilitates a path towards greater renewables through filling in some of the intermittent gaps that we'll see. And I do think it's a net benefit. I would like to know that I think there's a lot of challenges here to get here with the grid, particularly some that Anja brought out in the distribution utility, there's going to be a huge challenge for distribution utilities and their regulators because these assets are physically located in the grid and they will be injected. And I think how we work through this will really be key. And we need to make sure we're listening to the distribution utilities because it doesn't work without it. But with good market design, I think this will benefit all through better pricing, cleaner energy, and increased reliability in the end. I mentioned there's a lot of questions, a couple that are in our minds. I think we talked about the opt-out a little. Jay mentioned it. I do think that's a big question, and is demand response is a component within one of these DER aggregations? Is it still subject to Order 719, which is the opt-out? And I think that's just, we need clarity around that, and I think there's way forward both ways. Market design is a big question. One thought on my mind is how granular this will be. Where do we aggregate? The larger the aggregation, the more flexibility, the smaller, the riskier it becomes. But there's also advantages in being able to access the more localized energy. Perhaps a PJM capacity type structure or demand response type structure works where you can aggregate at the zone level, but dispatch more granularly in the zip code. But that's just one thought, and there's a lot to work through to figure out what works best. And the last kind of question that's really on my mind at the moment is how does this change interconnect requirements into the distribution utility? Because I think that's somewhere that many utilities already are striving to do better in, and to add more pressure there, we really expect better results without really working through and listening to their concerns could be problematic. But looking forward to the discussion, and yeah, thanks guys. Let's get to it if that's all right, Brett.
All right, thanks, Matthew. So you heard a lot of different views there. We got plenty of time for discussion. We're already getting a lot of questions, so we'll dive right in here. And there's obviously a lot of different ways we could take this, whether it's from a technical standpoint, markets, policy, whatever it might be. I'll say probably not going to get too technical on this panel, but we can go a little bit. But maybe just at a high level, I'll ask for all the panelists, do you see this order as being more incremental or more transformational for the markets? And we can just go across as we did before. So Anja, maybe we'll start with you there.
Sure. From a distribution utility perspective, I see this as more transformational in terms of the amount of change that will be required from the distribution utility, as far as the systems to be able to see those resources when they're participating in the market. Again, my point earlier about going from one-way power flow to two-way is going to be huge, and the ability to see these resources and how they're operating is going to be key. So this is really transformational from a utility perspective.
Thanks. Marcus?
Yeah, I think it could be incremental. It could also be transformational, depending on where some of those legal challenges, end up as the rehearing requests go on and things like that, where the final line eventually gets drawn for how much, visibility, if it's an interconnection requirement to the RTO, if the RTO deems that it's not reliable to participate unless on the distribution side interconnection is changed, it could be a slippery slope there where there is some bigger transformation that isn't really, I think, thought about just yet today. So from a market perspective, though, I don't see it as being hugely transformational. There's a lot of limitations as far as the market clearing engine technologies that go on at the RTOs that might limit some of the capabilities to optimize the system and integrate as many small resources as some people might be thinking about. So an example of that is MISO's battery storage compliance to 841 going down. That already went down to the 100 kW threshold, and they are not complying with that until 2022, next June, I believe. And so just because of the number of resources, it wouldn't be possible to include them until they had some significant technology upgrades. So those are some of the things that might might hamper the level of transformation.
Thanks. Jay?
Thank you. I think Marcus is absolutely right that it's a maybe kind of answer. And there's a couple of different reasons why. One is we don't know yet just how much DER there's going to be out there. Some parts of the country have enormous penetration and some don't. Is this really going to be a type of resource or sets of resources where the prices just keep coming down and the consumer value just keeps coming up? Is there going to be an electric vehicle in every garage? If there is, that makes this more transformational because there's that much more resource for the market to pursue. Or is this going to be something where really only the large commercial and industrial customers are likely to be participating to a significant extent? Then it may be transformational in some areas where that's a significant portion of the load, and much less so in some co-op territories, for example, which are mostly residential loads. We saw with retail competition that folks weren't really excited about aggregating rural residential customers. Is that going to be the same case here or not? We don't know yet. Second question is going to be, where is the value for DER ultimately going to be found? If the value is really for distribution value, if the value is really for the retail provider and their risk management, if the value is really behind the customer's meter for the customer, there's not going to be a lot of value to be aggregating into the market. The retail services are going to outcompete the wholesale aggregation services, and customers are going to participate more in the net metering, for example, than they are in wholesale aggregation. So we don't know where that's going to come out yet. And then the other issue is the one that Marcus raised at first, which was the legal issue. If the lines that FERC drew on where decisions are being made stay where they're drawn now, it's going to be less transformational than if they slip and we start rolling down that slope towards increased federalization and wholesale marketization, to create a new word, of things that have traditionally been managed at the state and retail level. I don't know where that law is going to wind up. It's going to be litigated. It's going to impose a lot of cost. If we wind up seeing significant penetration of resources, if we see significant aggregation, as I think Anja said they're already seeing in California, then yes, this will be truly transformational in the distribution system and extremely expensive for a lot of distribution systems. If it's a lot slower to move, then it's going to be a lot less transformational in other parts of the country.
Thanks. All right, Matthew?
Yeah, I agree with most of the comments here. I think it really depends on your vantage point. If from an RTO, ISO type of vantage point, I think this is probably a little less transformative and more progressive or incremental. We already had wheels in motion in many markets. Brett, you mentioned 841 earlier. New York ISOs, DR participation models, and another good example that was already here, headed in this type of direction. But from a distribution utility standpoint, it is certainly transformative. It requires more visibility, more understanding of what's going on in a more granular level than really ever been needed before. So I think that's where you're going to see the innovation. I don't know if that's good or bad news for distribution utilities. It's new rate base, which is good, and they'll get a fair share of the cost. But on the other hand, it's not simple stuff. This will take quite a lot of stakeholder meetings to work through, to put it simply. I do think there's a lot of positives here. You know, for one, it brings all the stakeholders to the table, and we're going to get better rules for that. I think ISOs and RTOs will eventually learn from each other and get better learning curve. We've seen that happen as other things have moved out. And I also think from a more investor type of standpoint, it's increased in visibility across the market. We know that there will be value for some of the grid services of these assets. Maybe we won't know the value, but that will equate to a little less risk and either more available capital or less expensive capital, which will again just make economics better for all.
Great, thanks,
Just
Andy.
want to add.
Up there, yeah, go ahead.
Sure, just wanted to add on. It's been a great discussion. Maybe just to add a little bit more context and contours to what I said in terms of it being transformational. You know, in California, in PG&E's service territory, we have approximately 1 in 4 solar rooftops that are in the country are in our service territory, and about 1 in 5 EVs. And with Governor Newsom's recent proposal to ban all fossil fuel vehicles in the future, we only see that increasing. So that kind of adds the context that creating these DER pathways is going to be essential. What pathway will they pursue, I think, is still up to regulators in terms of will that pathway be transformational as far as what FERC Order 222 requires, and will that be the preferred pathway? Or will it be something along the lines of retail rates that are more dynamic and more real time, as opposed to direct wholesale market participation? And along that veins, will it be kind of the distributed energy resource aggregation model, like what FERC Order 2222 has, or could it be something like demand response? And as I mentioned earlier, in California, that's been the preferred pathway to date because it has that capacity value, because it doesn't require 24/7 participation, and because it's just load. It doesn't have that same immediate need to coordinate on the distribution system like an exporting DER would.
Great, thanks. So no clear answer there. It's a wait and see. Another question we got, it goes back to what we touched on a little bit, is Order 719 and the opt-out allowing states to not allow DR aggregators, and lack of clarity with Order 2222, how it'll play out. So maybe how do you see this opt-out going in the future? Is there a difference between demand response and DR aggregation, and you know, what way should or will this go? So Marcus, you have some thoughts on that?
I certainly do. Yeah, on the opt-out piece, that's something that's been getting whittled away bit by bit by FERC, going back to energy efficiency resources, and then 841 in storage, and surprisingly in 2222, FERC held the opt-out for third-party aggregation for demand response only, and in following up with FERC, we understand that to mean it includes any aggregation that includes any component that is demand response. If a state is barring third-party aggregation, then that applies to that aggregation if it has demand response within it. So this is something that's currently being challenged in MISO. I believe Jay mentioned that earlier. So we are certainly gearing up to respond to that. And it's interesting because it goes to who gets to participate at the wholesale level. There's over 10% of the MISO peak capacity is demand response right now, load modifying resources. And if third-party aggregation is going to displace what's already in existence, at the state or retail level, is it a net positive, or is it just different people providing the resource? So this is something that I think is certainly timely, but I'm not sure where it'll end up given the challenge to 719 that's going on right now. So I know Jay has more to say on it. But.
Yeah, as I was going to pass to Jay next.
Thank you. Now that I'm on again. So first, I saw a question over in the box on the right. let's try and clarify what applies to what. 719 preserved in 2222 an opt-out and an opt-in. The opt-out is for the regulator of utilities that sell more than 4 million megawatt hours in the year before. And the opt-in is for those regulators for utilities that sold less than 4 million megawatt hours in the year before. That opt-in applies now to all DER, including storage, if it's aggregated. Storage large enough to be bid directly into the market without being aggregated doesn't get the opt-in or the opt-out. It has the right to participate under 841. So there's demand response, opt-in, opt-out, large storage directly bid in, and then the rest of DER, which is opt-in. So why is this important? And there's a big picture policy reason why the opt-out, opt-in is important. And there's a practical reason why the opt-out, opt-in is important. Let's start with the big picture policy piece. It's up to state and local regulators to decide what the retail electric delivery model is going to be in that state, or the state legislature. Is it going to be retail competition or vertical integration? And there's a lot of disagreement amongst all of those of us in the policy world about which is better. Is it retail markets are better or vertical integration is better? But that decision is the state's decision. And if the state has kept to vertical integration, then the state is looking to take advantage of what they see as efficiencies of scale, scope, and integration that are available in a vertically integrated utility for managing cost, volatility, and risks of providing a bundled retail electric service for all consumers. And one of the tools that the utilities have available to provide that service is the management of DERs. And they are a tool for managing distribution risks and costs, transmission risks and costs, and power supply and market risks and costs. And if the regulator has made the decision for vertical integration, the opt-in, opt-out allows us to protect that model and ensure that the risk and portfolio manager, the utility, has all available resources to meet the need. That means no free riding and no cherry picking. Nobody's going to come in and take a resource that provided a lot of value to the system as a whole, bid it into the market, and have it now be unavailable to the portfolio manager for managing that portfolio. And increasing risk because there's now a large load or collection of loads that has greater uncertainty because they're no longer within the control of the utility. So that's the big picture policy reason. Are you relying on the utility to manage risk and portfolio, or are you going to have somebody else doing that through the market? The practical one is the one that Anja's been talking about. Third-party aggregation can be complicated and expensive. And Matt is exactly right. This is going to require a lot of stakeholder work at the RTOs to figure out. When you talk about a small electric utility, you may be talking about a co-op with 10 employees. They cannot send somebody to an RTO stakeholder process. They don't have the resource, they don't have the expertise, they don't have the time. How are they going to describe what their needs are for the integration process? They've only got so much capital that they can use to invest in the system. Are they going to be investing it in all of the back office and middle office tools required to enable safe, reliable, and affordable third-party aggregation? Or are they going to wind up being unaware of what's happening on their own system because they simply can't afford the tools to give them the visibility they need to be able to provide good service? They might be much better off hiring a company like Matt's to manage this for them, or to use the old-fashioned tools like radio signals to manage load. Maybe they don't need that much visibility to be managing load using the simpler tools for simpler needs, as opposed to investing in the expensive tools required for third-party aggregation into an RTO. So the opt-in is really important for those smaller utilities that don't have Anja's resources, to make sure that they're able to serve their consumers affordably and effectively. Thank you. Sorry to have rambled on so long.
No, a lot to unpack there, and so a plug for Matt. Anyone else want to chime in on this one? You don't have to, but let's see. No?
Oh, I'll say a couple of words because I think some folks probably expect me to. And I think the opt-in, opt-out, it's a complex issue. What I'd like to see is to make sure each market develops a way to allow these loads to be recognized. Whether that comes through FERC, comes through the distribution utility, both because they have different objectives. I don't really have a horse in the race, so I'm not necessarily against some of the opt-in, opt-out provisions, but more would like to make sure that honest dialogue happens and we find a way to make our system cleaner and more economic. So I mean, I think the FERC 2222 is one way that's headed that way. It is certainly not the only tool in the chest we have as a grid to utilize DERs. Maybe that's my highest level thoughts too.
Thanks. Okay, you got one question that's a little more on the technical side that maybe Anja can address related to AMI. So looking at the data requirements and the metering requirements and what role AMI will play and whose responsibility is it for the metering for DER. So Anja, what are your thoughts there?
Sure. I'll flag I'm no metering or AMI expert, but the rule itself has ISOs and RTOs establish those metering rules. And that also means that the distribution utility and local regulatory authority have a role there. And so you'll see kind of the rules related to AMI and metering likely play out in rate cases. However, if an ISO or RTO has more stringent standards than what the distribution utility or the state regulator has, there's likely going to be a delta there, causing maybe a pay-to-play scenario in which that DER will need to have different systems in order to participate under FERC Order 2222. I'm curious, Matt, from your perspective as an aggregator, what your thoughts might be.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a hard question to talk about in the abstract, and I'm certainly not an AMI expert. Much of the country still does not have AMI, although I think in California you're doing fairly well. Many of these devices have their own meters, right? And so not all of them necessarily need to be, this is all part of the market design, but we don't need to come up with a baseline for everything. If you have a battery and it's discharging into a meter, it's pretty easy to tell how much energy or capacity you're providing in that time. So I'm not sure if AMI is going to be available. I do think there is certainly benefits, and AMI will allow for greater flexibility, particularly on the demand response or traditional curtailment types of services. But I also think it's a really hard challenge to get AMI out there in many cases. Especially when you have AMR already deployed and can't make just the cost argument to get that out there.
Thanks.
Yeah, and this is one thing to add on to that is, as states within MISO make different determinations for the need for AMI and consider, that investment, it could lead to a patchwork of metering and data availability throughout the RTO footprint. So one of the things that we work on, as it relates to this subject with MISO is how do they accommodate a variety of capability throughout the market to either do M&V or to do settlements. And so they need something that works, there's just not one solution. And so finding, that sort of umbrella that will work for the most resources is a challenge because it's not uniform, and it won't be when it comes time to comply with the order.
One That's a great point. And one far out comment here, and I'll reserve it to be far out to start with, is can some of these DERs provide some of the infrastructure that's missing within the grid for our, I'll go past the onions, say omnidirectional future. But can some of these devices that are getting deployed that are already rolling trucks do that and help provide an added layer of data back to the utility that provides some value? And I don't have a definitive answer for that now, but I hope so.
This is going to be a different challenge in different parts of the country. If you're going to be bringing back a tremendous amount of data on a very short time frame for some of the market products, you're going to need high-speed internet. We've got a lot of rural America and some urban America that doesn't yet have high-speed internet access. There just isn't fiber that would be needed to backhaul the kind of data that the RTOs might need for some services. That's not going to be something that an individual DR provider is going to be able to pay for. That's too expensive to run a fiber all the way out to a customer to be able to bring back that kind of data. If you've got that kind of network, but you've got 15-minute meters out there and you've got an aggregator that wants to provide a service that requires 5-minute data, how much money are we going to be spending to replace 15-minute meters with 5-minute meters? And creating the storage required and the DERMS required to move from 15-minute data to 5-minute data. That's an awful lot of additional data. And so there's huge cost implications depending on what folks want to do, when they want to do it, and where they want to do it. And it's going to be really important for the state and local regulators to have some say in whether those costs are incurred and by whom. And I frankly am a little bit worried that if FERC is worried about its markets, it's not its statutory obligation to worry about those local customers and their local distribution system needs. And we're going to have to find a way to make sure that those determinations that state and local regulators are really accustomed to making get made there, where those folks have the expertise and have the knowledge and have the statutory obligation to be concerned about those implications.
Yeah, all good points. And we got a few minutes left here. We'll try to get a couple more. And maybe related to that, we got some questions about interconnection, right? So there's this question of jurisdiction of interconnection of DER, whether it's the at a FERC level or at the retail level. So Marcus, are you able to address that?
Yeah. So state commissions, or depending on their enabling legislation, it could just be written into some law somewhere, set their interconnection standards for the distribution system. So it's different all throughout the state, but the states within MISO that I'm most familiar with are looking at upgrading interconnection standards to IEEE 1547. We have a couple states that are sort of on the leading edge of that. But it will be determined by each of the commissions. And so, again, it might not be uniform, and 2222 doesn't intrude on that. So the way a DER interconnects into the distribution system will be set by the state interconnection standards. It isn't a FERC jurisdictional matter. And so they were very clear on that you don't have to go through the typical GI process and get studied and have a pro forma GIA or something like that is on the books for other resources connecting to the transmission system. So it will be interesting if the RTOs decide that an aggregation needs to be studied as injecting, and they set up a unique study for this aggregation and determining whether or not that is reliable or not. They might set up their own process. I think there's flexibility there for how the interconnection of the aggregation works and what it looks like at the RTOs, but it won't be the distribution level interconnection standard that is still state jurisdictional that is likely to be non-uniform. So I think I might have mentioned something on that earlier, but hope that answers the question.
Yeah, Thanks. Look like Jay had his hand raised.
If I may, Marcus is absolutely right about what's in the regulation. This is one of those areas where I worry about litigation. So imagine you've got a storage unit that's out there at somebody's facility that was studied and interconnected under state law for behind the meter use. They now want to sell into the wholesale market. The state says that's going to need to be restudied for that purpose. And they say, this is a state rule that interferes with my ability to participate in the market. The FERC SGIP should apply, and they go to court. I don't know how the court will rule. I do expect that will get litigated at some point. That could be one of those truly transformational issues. Do the states decide all of the issues that are in an interconnection agreement, including who bears what risks, who bears what costs, what studies are or are not permitted? Tremendous amount of decisions that have to do with the safety, reliability, and power quality on the local system now being made at the local level. Will those have to be litigated at FERC instead of locally? And we don't know the answer to that yet. We know what FERC says the answer is, but I think that one will wind up in court.
Thanks. Anja, anything you want to add there? Or? No? Okay. A few more minutes left here. And one thing I feel like on a lot of these technical calls, we lose sight of the ultimate customer. So I always like to ask, what's the impact or the benefit for the customers here, both from a participation standpoint and in a broader market sense, from a cost savings, prices, reliability. So maybe each of you can give 30 seconds or so on what you think how this will help customers. So maybe Anja, you want to go first?
Sure. I think the ultimate goal is that customers that have installed distributed energy resources can make the most of those resources in terms of it helps pay for those systems. We see more of those DERs out there. And again, the ultimate goal is to have enablement pathways. Is this through FERC Order 2222? Is it through other programs? Is it through real-time rates? From a customer perspective, they're not policy wonks in terms of, they're a preferred pathway. Their goal is their bottom line, and hopefully they'd like to make it as simple as possible. A lack of complexity. And one of the ways we think about it at PG&E is how can we make this automated and imperceptible to the customer so that it's a seamless experience for them. There's a lot of work on that front, but I think the ultimate goal of the customer is just to be able to realize the benefits of having those DERs.
Thanks. Marcus?
Yeah, I think from the customer standpoint, the ultimate goal is to have a system in place where the efficiency and reliability that exists today in the wholesale markets is able to be maintained. So whether there's increased levels of coordination with the demand side resources in the wholesale market to ensure that that the dispatch at the wholesale level of all the variable generation that's out there can be smoothed out and coordinated in a way that maintains that economic efficiency and that reliability, that's really the benefit. So whatever avenue that happens through, as long as it happens and the customer is receiving that benefit, I think is the most important piece, because you don't want variability at the transmission level, variability at the distribution level, and there's just too much of that going on that you end up with an inefficient dispatch, and it's also unreliable on top of it. That's the worst case scenario. So that's what I'm most looking forward to.
Great. Yeah, agreed. Jay?
Thank you very much. And first, thank you for asking that question. That should always be the question that we ask. It should always be about the customer. So thank you. Great final question. And then after that, I'm mostly just going to echo what Anja and Marcus said. Yes, the goal is to try and find the customers a way to get benefit seamlessly, a way to make sure that they continue to get the quality service that they're getting now and maybe better service. Whether this rule is going to get us that or not, I'm not sure yet. It has to do with a lot of the uncertainties that we talked about earlier. But I certainly hope that we can find the pathway to that. And I do think that respecting the local decisions as much as we can is going to help us get there. So thank you.
Great. All right. Matthew, you want to wrap it up for us?
Yeah, sure thing. And I agree with what's been said. I think for your individual customer, there is value in helping them find their best way to market and reap the value of their investments and the way they operate. The one thing that we didn't really dig in deep, but perhaps could be alluded from this question is the collective customer or just society at large. And I think there is an economic gain if we do this right. Underlined 3 times, if we design the right program and we listen to all stakeholders, I do think there is an economic gain to have here, and perhaps a bit more diverse grid in that this is a diverse resource. When a big power plant goes down, it's a huge impact. When an aggregation of DRs has an issue, it's probably taking 5% off the top of it. It depends on the issue, but one asset out of a whole aggregation. So it's an interesting resource that has its strengths and its weaknesses, and but will give better diversity to the whole generation stack. And just like to say, enjoyed the conversation with you guys.
All right. Likewise. Thanks, everyone. And thanks to the audience for great questions. And I'll pass it back to Rich to take us home.
So we are out of time, I regret to say. Thank you to all you panelists and those in attendance today. To get more valuable load management information, don't miss our upcoming 42nd conference, which runs from November 9th through the 12th. You've been listening to Load Management Dialogue presented by PLMA. To learn about upcoming dialogues and an archive of past recordings, visit peakload.org or your favorite podcast platform. This concludes this edition.